I don't want no oil a-spoiling my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things a-creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes!
Good morning, Toledo, and good afternoon, Columbus, and hello to those of you listening on the internet, wherever and whenever you are. My name is Joe DeMare, and I am here, quote-unquote, with my incredible co-host, Rebecca Wood. Yes,
Rebecca Wood. I was muted for a second. I didn't mean to be.
Okay, yeah. Well, and that's because when I say here, I'm actually in Washington, D.C. at the moment, and Rebecca is still back there in good old Toledo. And, of course, hopefully at some point we'll be hearing from you at 877-909-1007. That's 877-909-1007. Or this week you can text in also at 419-973-5841. And what you've tuned into is For a Green Future. And For a Green Future is a show where we talk about ecology and the environment. And we talk about them in the ways that they affect you, your wealth, your health, happiness, the wealth and health and happiness of your friends and your family and your pets and the critters that you see running around outside, and the birds and the fish and the algae and pretty much everybody and everything, because all of us are wrapped up together in this wonderful planet called Earth. And we have a wonderful show lined up for you today. We had arranged for actually 2 guests this week. Pat Marida was supposed to call in at about 10 after, and she may still do that. We've had trouble getting hold of her. But talking about House Bill 434, and if she doesn't, we'll just rearrange stuff, and we'll still get you the information. And then we have, after our little chat here at the beginning, we have an interview with Dr. Helen Caldicott. It's our second interview with the amazing Dr. Caldicott, who was instrumental in stopping the nuclear arms race back in the 80s. And she's got quite a bit to say about what's going on today, and talking about the re-release of her film, If You Love This Planet. Then we will hear from our advertisers and patrons, those fantastic people and organizations. Then, Rebecca, you have something you're bringing up today. What is that?
Yeah, it's just super exciting and highly technical and specific concept. Trees. I'm doing trees because it's World Tree Day, actually, as opposed to Arbor Day. Perhaps they have figured out that no one knows that arbor is another word for tree anymore. I don't know.
I see. So we're not talking about the Norse Yggdrasil, right? The world tree, right? That we're talking about.
Oh, no. We could talk about that if you want to, but I didn't do any research. It has a squirrel on it. It is a squirrel. I know that much.
No, I don't want you to have to redo your whole thing during the show.
It has a squirrel with a lot of attitude running up and down the trunk, as I understand it.
Well, that's interesting. We'll have to do it another show.
In other words, it's just a squirrel, because all squirrels have a lot of attitude.
This
one's just magical. Yes.
I have not met a squirrel yet that didn't have, attitude. So, okay, well, then after we talk to Rebecca about trees, we will hear some ecological news. And as I said, hopefully at some point during this hour, we're going to hear from you at 877-909-1007, or you can call in at 419-973, or this is the text number, 419-973-5841. Okay, well, as I said, I happen to be in Washington, D.C. today, and that's because of family stuff. I drove down here to pick up my son for Thanksgiving, and we drove back from visiting the rest of my family in Western New York last night, as a matter of fact. And I had to just stop and, driving down, once we got to the East Coast here, it was just solid cars. I mean, it was 10 o'clock on a Saturday night, and the triple lane highway that we were on was just solid headlights and taillights. And, I couldn't help think about all the carbon all of us were putting in the air there. Yeah, I was driving the Wonder Van, and the Wonder Van is getting about 31.5 miles per gallon on this trip. But I'm still, running on gas, and it's just so difficult sometimes as an environmentalist to, you just, sometimes this stuff just hits you that we have the technology. We've got trains. We've got electric trains. We've got electric maglev trains that, if we used that technology, we'd be moving all those people with a tiny fraction of the amount of carbon. And instead, we just keep sticking to this early 20th century technology of everybody having individual gas-powered cars. And, we have to stop. And the thing is that a lot of people don't quite get it, that we will stop. Either
one way or another.
Either we'll do it consciously. We'll make a transition. We'll go to looking ahead into the green future. We will change our habits and change our technologies. Don't worry.
It's just a question if we start braking now or if we just stop by smacking into a wall.
Exactly.
A brick wall at 60 miles an hour.
Right. Because if we don't make the conscious, easy decision that keeps everybody's quality of life high, we're going to crash into the wall, and, supply chains will be interrupted, and, there'll be individual symptoms for each disaster and each point at which we lose our ability to maintain this unsustainable technology that we got going. But we will eventually break down, and we'll stop that way. And I don't want to crash into the wall, all right? We've all got our hands on the wheel, okay? And if all of us turn away from the wall, we will miss the wall. So just another exhortation, do whatever you can to help get us to that green future. And we have on the line someone I've known for many years who does all that she can to help protect us from an unsustainable technology, which is nuclear technology. Pat, are you there?
Yes. Hi, Joe. Can you hear me?
Yes, I could hear you. Thanks so much for calling in. I got a little worried there because when I was trying to text you this morning. Yeah,
I forgot to turn my phone on this morning, but I'm here now.
That's all that matters, Pat. You're here now. So, all right. And you're here to talk to us about the horrible HB 434.
Yes, and thank you so much for having me on. So this bill, it actually authorizes the creation of a new Ohio authority. It's called the Ohio Nuclear Development Authority. And they would be tasked with doing research and development on new nuclear reactors. So we're saying, well, what is an authority? Ohio only has one authority, and that is listed along with the other agencies. And the difference between an agency and an authority is murky, but an authority actually often has business practices that are outside of accountability and oversight requirements. And things like employment practices and contracts and procurement procedures, financial reporting, this is all very murky, and it's all would be sort of very secretive under put under the Ohio Department of Development, and any contract would be put out by Jobs Ohio, and we know that Jobs Ohio is sort of out of public oversight as well.
So HB 434 creates this dark organization that basically regular people have no input to, that can try to create new nuclear power plants. It also would control nuclear waste, correct? It could plunk nuclear waste down wherever it wanted.
Yeah, and the bill is only 14 pages long. And this is another problem with it. You know, how do you create an entire new state authority in only 14 pages? But worse than that is almost 6 of these 14 pages are all about how they are going to keep the board of directors of this new authority in-house. So the six pages talk about creating a nominating committee out of a certain group of people, leaving the public out. The nominating committee will pick people for the board of this new authority, and that nominating committee then will submit those names to the governor. The governor cannot choose their own people from the public or this board. They will have to choose those submitted to them by this in-house authority. And
unelected board.
And when you talked about the waste, this research and development of new reactors doesn't really have anything to do with waste until, of course, the reactor is built and creating waste. So a couple of the things that they talk about, the wonders of this new bill, are using nuclear waste for various things. Well, does Ohio really want to have control of nuclear waste? And then there are 7. The bill mentions isotopes 7 times, and we presume they're talking about medical isotopes. But even that is a secondary industry that would also use waste from a nuclear reactor to research and develop medical isotopes. But there are better ways now of making medical isotopes than using nuclear waste. There's cyclotrons are being developed to do that right now.
Right. Now, this bill was proposed by the evil Dick Stein, and where are we at in the process of this thing becoming law? So
the bill has already passed the House, and that was earlier in the year. And now that the legislature has resumed meeting in the lame duck, a lot of things are getting sneaked through, and this bill could even be attached to another bill. But right now it is in the Senate Energy and Public Utilities Committee. And they will be hearing proponent testimony next Tuesday at 10:30 in the morning. And people can watch that, if you want to, on the Ohio channel. And we presume that the following week, the following Tuesday, they will be having opponent testimony, maybe also proponent and interested party testimony, and possibly even vote on it, which would be December 13th.
Huh. Yeah, pushing this through. It kind of feels like they the horrible scandal surrounding House Bill 6 and the nuclear industry there didn't really seem to translate into any kind of paying any kind of penalty at the ballot box this past election. So it seems like they feel like, oh, now we can do anything, and because this bill is just insane in terms of the state trying to create nuclear waste dumps and creating this secretive organization that the public has no input on, in order to just take nuclear plants and shove them down people's throats. And it's all kind of especially ironic since a study just came out this past week about the effect of having a nuclear industry in Ohio. Do you know about the Piketon report that Joseph Mangano just put out?
Yes, I'm one of the coordinators with the Ohio Nuclear Free Network, and our network actually hired Joe Mangano to write a report from using the statistics from the Ohio Department of Health about the health and the cancers and the death rate in Pike County, which is around this nuclear uranium enrichment plant, which enriched uranium from the 1950s up until the early part of this century. And he discovered that the death rate in Pike County is twice the national average, and cancers are way high.
Right. And before the plant went in, that was the cancer rate and the death rate were actually below the national average.
That's right.
Yeah.
And one thing I want to say about House Bill 434 too is that the investment bank Lazard, so they determined, the last statistics come from 2021, and they determined that new nuclear is 4 to 5 times more expensive. That the electricity from new nuclear will be 4 to 5 times more expensive than the electricity from new solar or wind. So why are we subsidizing something? Wall Street, the reason they're asking taxpayers to do this is because Wall Street won't fund it. They can't get any bank funding for this. It has to be the taxpayers that fund nuclear.
All right. Well, Pat, unfortunately, we've got a packed show. We got to move on today, but thank you so much for calling and sharing this with you, and we will continue to watch it as it unfolds.
Yes, and I appreciate you having me on, and go search for Ohio Nuclear Free Network, and you can find out more about what's going on with House Bill 434.
Right. Ohio Nuclear Free Network. Thanks, Pat.
Yes.
All right. Well, now, as I told Pat, we are jam-packed, and go ahead, Josh, and cue up the interview with Helen Caldicott, because we got to just get right to it, because this interview actually went a little long, but it was so good I couldn't, cut very much of it. I cut what I could. So let's hear from Helen.
Acres and acres of solar panels with sheep grazing underneath them, so that you can produce products to sell as well as make sustainable energy. And it was just amazing. And then on the hills, there were probably hundreds of huge windmills turning slowly in the wind. So, Australia is perfect to be a sustainable, renewable energy country, because we're blown by wind, where the sun shines all the time nearly, and we should totally run on renewable energy. And we should stop digging up coal, and we should stop fracking for natural gas, which is a huge global warmer. Methane is. However, the government said jobs. It's like the Pentagon. If you try and cut money for any of these ghastly, murderous weapon systems, the Pentagon screams jobs and the Congress people scream jobs. You don't have jobs to destroy the world.
Right. It's good people are working, but I think it makes some difference what they're doing with those jobs. And if they're making the whole planet less habitable, that's not.
Well, if they're working to kill the planet, that's not a good idea.
Right. Now,
and we're all physicians to a dying planet at the moment, every one of us. And as in medicine, I took the Hippocratic Oath. You don't do anything to damage anyone. You work for the health and well-being of your patients. And this is the planet. The planet is in the intensive care unit, and it's mortally ill at the moment.
Right. Yeah, and some of the symptoms of that. Last time when we talked in 2020, you gave us some pretty graphic descriptions of the fires that were happening in Australia. And now you're having floods.
Terrible, terrible floods. Yes. And they happened so fast. You know, there was a woman with her newborn baby in the house, and suddenly she was up to her neck in water, and someone helped her climb up on a chair up into the attic of the house with her baby, and they weren't even sure if she would be safe there. And farmlands are totally flooded. Livestock are dying, but people are losing their houses left, right, and centre. And it's all obviously a result of global warming.
Right.
But the politicians are sort of slow to glom onto it. You know, they're scientifically and medically kind of illiterate, and they worry about votes. But this isn't about votes. This is about saving the planet.
Right.
So we had dreadful fires 3 years ago. Just the whole bush exploded because there'd been a drought. Everything was dry. The trees were dry, and they just exploded. Now we're in the middle of what's called an El Niño, where the water in the Pacific, I think, becomes very warm as it flows around Australia. And of course, that allows a lot of moisture to be sucked up into the clouds and dropping on us.
I know, and it's not like these things were unexpected, and because global atmospheric scientists have been warning about it for decades.
Well, I wrote this book, If You Love This Planet, how many years ago?
It'd be about
2009. And everything that's happening now was predicted then by the scientists. And I thought, right, everyone will read this book and they'll fix it. Well, guess what? I mean, what's the use of even doing anything, I wonder? The only way to make politicians listen is to threaten them and threaten their future. And I think when we live in a democracy, we don't understand what that means. But what it means is that the politicians are our representatives. We are their leaders. And unless we involve ourselves in the democracy, like going to see our congresspeople and senators and saying, if you don't read this book and do thus, thus, and thus, we'll make sure you're not elected next time. And we'll door knock and make sure. Well, there was some evidence of this in your recent election, which was quite fascinating, but not enough, of course. Things are moving, but I think they're moving at a slower pace than is necessary to save probably life on Earth. And then, of course, there's the risk of nuclear war.
Right.
So we'll either, have nuclear winter, which will fix global warming.
Well,
this
brings me to why I asked for an interview right now, and that is that this is the 40th anniversary of your Academy Award-winning film, If You Love This Planet. And I rewatched it, and I first watched it 40 years ago when I was 20 and you were also younger.
I looked a bit prettier then.
No, you're still fine. But
no, I'm getting old, and anyway, go on.
Right. And I was trying to see which parts of it hadn't really aged very well, which part might still not be applicable. And there really wasn't any part that is not current to our current situation. It's still very, 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 very important in our time, maybe even more important than it was 40 years ago. One thing that is a little different, though, you mentioned this in another interview, is the switch to having AI make the decisions for nuclear war. Could you expand on that a little bit?
Yes, well, Stephen Hawking, before he died, which I don't know, 4 years ago, I can't remember, he predicted that because the Pentagon and these bloody fools putting nuclear weapons and the systems on artificial intelligence, he predicted within 10 years it makes nuclear war inevitable. And when I read that, I thought, oh my God. So I organized a symposium at the New York Academy of Medicine on this very topic. And we produced a book called From That Sleepwalking to Armageddon, which is pretty scary stuff with a lot of just very eminent speakers, including Ellsberg. But it doesn't make any difference. I mean, you can do all of this academic stuff, but the politicians don't read it. And the politicians, unfortunately, are almost all corporate prostitutes. They get their money for the election from the military industrial complex and from the oil companies and the gas companies and the like. They don't represent us. And what's fascinating me is that during this election that you've just had, and I'm sitting in Australia, I had hundreds of emails a day, all pleading, asking me for money. In Australia, voting is compulsory. We don't need money to elect our representatives. We just follow what they do and vote them in or out. And it occurred to me, it's almost obscene, asking me for money to get elected in a country where, you know, voting should be absolutely compulsory in America, as it is here.
Well, I think a lot of Americans make the mistake of depending on advertising bought by the candidates to make their judgment about the candidates.
Yeah.
And it takes a degree of critical thinking to understand that you can't base your decision on what they're telling you about themselves. You have to look at what they actually do.
Yeah.
So that's
and be informed yourself.
Right. And so that's what we try to do on my show is, you know, we did a review of a lot of the regional candidates before the election, and we just looked at their policies environmentally and you know, let people make their own decision based on that. Wanted to get your opinion on something else that's different right now, and that is the war in Ukraine. And, you know, every day it seems that another Ukrainian power plant loses power, has to rely on backup power. How dangerous is this for not just Ukraine, but for the world?
There are 15 nuclear reactors in the Ukraine. One of them, of course, is Chernobyl, which is still very tenuous because it's got a huge amount of molten fuel in its basement. It's called the Elephant's Foot. It's just a huge mass of mold. Well, it's probably it's solidified now, molten radioactive fuel that melted its way through the floor of the containment into the basement. The land around Chernobyl is very, very radioactive, and some Russian soldiers went there and bivouacked there and dug, you know, trenches and slept there and stuff. It's incredibly radioactive. So their prognosis for getting cancer is really high. It occurred to me 2 days ago that we talk about nuclear war and Putin talks about dropping a nuclear bomb. I don't think he will, but if he did in the Ukraine, all those 15 reactors would melt down. Many of them contain, with their cooling pools of spent fuel rods and the reactor itself, much more radiation than was released at Chernobyl. So you would have a nuclear bomb causing meltdown of 15 reactors, releasing all of that radioactivity all over Europe, but all over the Northern Hemisphere. The winds tend to not mix at the equator, the air masses. So, because, I don't know why, but they don't. So the Northern Hemisphere would be given a fatal dose of radiation, probably. My son lives there. If anything like that happened, I'd fly them straight out to Australia if I could get them here. Also, my grandson lives in Sweden. I'd get him out as fast as I could. It's absolutely bloody terrifying. And the physicists kind of knew this subliminally when they were creating nuclear reactors and bombs and stuff, but they went ahead because they were so fascinated with the physics and the power and the glory.
Yeah.
God damn them.
I've heard it described as the beauty of the equations. And I'm like,
Yes,
okay.
and the Pentagon talks about nuclear war in sexual terms. They talk about nuclear war as one big orgasmic wump. They talk about missile erectors, soft laydown, deep penetration in front of women, and it's clearly sexual.
Yeah.
So, E equals MC squared is a huge mass of energy released, and it turns them on. I'm very sick of men. I'm sick of testosterone. And it's time women took over. Well, people say, well, look at Thatcher and stuff. I think what happens is if the few women that do get into power tend to join the male ethos so that they can stay in power. But 52% of the world's population are women, and we have hormones that are nurturing, like oxytocin and progesterone and estrogen, as opposed to testosterone. And I've written a piece about this called Why Men Kill and Why Women Let Them. If we don't take over, I mean, it's going to be too late. Although there are some wonderful people being elected now, like Lula in Brazil and other men who are excellent people.
Let me back up half a step. You said that even if Putin drops a smaller nuclear weapon, all the nuclear plants would melt down.
Probably.
Are you talking about, let's say, the EMP frying their controls?
No, not EMP. EMP only occurs if you blow a bomb up in space, and it's electromagnetic pulse. And if you blow a bomb up in space, the pulse will take out the electricity supply of 6 western states of the United States of America. So it's a great way to paralyze a country. But no, EMP only operates if you blow the bomb up in space.
So are you just talking about the interruption of the electric supply and the diesel? Why are you saying if he blows a small bomb, all 15 plants will probably melt down?
Well, they call them small bombs, tactical nuclear weapons, but they're much bigger than the Hiroshima bomb, which was 15 kilotons or 13. They're bigger than that. They're 20 kilotons, equivalent to 20,000 tons of TNT or bigger. They call them small because the big ones are bloody huge. And there would be massive fires that would spread everywhere. People would be incinerated. They'd just be vaporized. And the electrical supply would similarly be interrupted. But the Ukraine is a big country. I saw it on the map yesterday on the television. It's a pretty big country. But the interacting electrical circuits, I don't know how that works in the Ukraine, but it would definitely melt down quite a few reactors. So you've got radiation from the bomb and you've got the radiation from the reactors, which would cause acute radiation illness in millions and millions and millions of people in the Northern Hemisphere, where the blood cells are killed, the gut cells are killed, and people die of vomiting, hemorrhaging, acute diarrhea. I mean, it's a hideous death.
Right. And you go into some detail about that in the film, If You Love This Planet. One thing that I got reminded of, that you kind of forget that nuclear war would be a disaster for us humans, but it also, I completely forgot about the idea of it wiping out the ozone layer and, causing huge environmental problems that way.
Yes.
So, yeah. So
wiping out the ozone layer means that you'd get 3rd-degree sunburn outside in about 3 minutes, because it's the ozone layer that protects us from the ultraviolet light of the sun.
Right. And of course, nuclear winter and all other, I think it would be safe to say it would be the greatest environmental damage since life began on Earth.
Yeah, well, we're on a route to exterminate ourselves, either immediately with nuclear war or slowly with global warming. Which makes me wonder, as a physiologist, are we an evolutionary aberrant?
Well, I don't know, but But I going back to 40 years ago briefly, the peace movement was much, much stronger back then. And I think part of what went on is there were some very positive treaties signed. Nuclear arms actually did get reduced. A lot of the old Soviet Union's weapons were dismantled, and I think people kind of felt like we kind of won, that the peace movement kind of won. But then Obama committed us to $1 trillion to revamp our nuclear arsenal. What do you think about that decision?
Well, he wanted to get the START II treaty through the Senate. And there was a very powerful man called Senator Kyle. And Kyle said he'd allow the START II treaty to pass the Senate if they spent $1 trillion over the next 30 years replacing every single nuclear weapon, missile, plane, ship, and submarine. And that's what happened. For God's sake, that's what happened under Obama. And he agreed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Evil, the evil men. The other day I was thinking about America, because almost all your tax dollars, over half of the discretionary funds that you pay in tax, go to building weapons to murder. It's not the Department of Defense. It's the Department of Murder, because that's what these weapons do. They murder people.
Yeah, in a horrible way. So we're just about out of time here. So just two quick things. One, is there anything you'd like to say to my audience that we haven't covered yet?
Yes, I would like to say, please go to my website, helencaldicott.com, and watch the film If You Love This Planet. It was made 40 years ago. I was so tired. I'd already given a speech, and I turned up and all these Klieg lights and stuff. And I thought, oh my God, I gave the speech. The Canadian Film Board filmed it, turned it into this film, and it won an Oscar. But although the haircuts are old-fashioned, the data is totally available and applicable now, and it breaks through people's psychic numbing. And it makes them understand what we're really facing, and makes them cry. And then people are motivated. They think, oh my God, what am I going to do? And they're motivated to move and create, go to their Congress. You own the Congress. It's yours. You own the Senate, not the other corporations that pay. You own them. Use your power. One person can be incredibly powerful. I led the peace movement in the 80s because I had a publicist in Hollywood who worked for me for free. She worked for Tom Cruise and all the others, but she put me on television. And as Jefferson said, an informed democracy will behave in a responsible fashion. And that's what happened in the 80s. 80% of Americans were opposed to nuclear war. We got 1 million people in Central Park. And it caused eventually, and I met with Reagan in the White House for an hour and a quarter, holding his hand because he didn't know much. He was quoting to me from the Reader's Digest. But eventually that huge movement, 80% of Americans, and all over the world, because I traveled all over the world, and Gorbachev met, and they almost agreed over a weekend to abolish nuclear weapons, but they got hung up on Star Wars. Reagan thought it was terrific. The weapons go bounce, 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 bounce. Gorbachev knew it wouldn't work. And he should have said, look, have your stupid Star Wars, but let's abolish nuclear weapons. And when the Cold War ended, we all thought, thank God. But there's a man called Norman Augustine in Lockheed Martin who didn't like the fact that the Cold War ended. He went to all the little newly liberated countries along the Russian border, said, do you want to be a democracy? Of course they did. So do you want to join NATO? Yes. To join NATO, they had to spend billions of dollars equipping themselves with weapons. And he destroyed the peace that was created between Reagan and Gorbachev. That man, and I wrote about it, and it's well documented, that's called evil. And I realized the other day that, in fact, if you look at it clearly, America is a cult of murder, because all your money, nearly all your money, goes into these devices that murder people. And 1 million people were murdered since 9/11, none of whom had anything to do with 9/11 at all. I mean, and it is murder. War is murder. And that's what stupid Putin is doing. And I mean, it's hideous.
Yeah.
Hideous.
Yeah, it's hard to argue otherwise. But like I say, I like to sort of start positive and end positive.
Yes.
So I want to ask you, what do you think about the recently passed UN treaty banning nuclear weapons?
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Mhm.
And it was initiated by two men who I know in Australia, Tim
Oh.
Wright, who was an acolyte of mine, and Dr. Tilman Ruff, who is in the physicians movement. And I think it's got over 100 signatures now and ratification by about 82 countries to abolish nuclear weapons. And who hasn't signed it? The nuclear powers. How dare they not sign it? How dare they?
Right.
You know, they're holding our lives at ransom, but not just our lives. You should see out my window now, my roses and the star jasmine and the birds. Everything on earth is being held at ransom at the moment.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Caldicott.
But listen, I was only one person in America. I was a foreigner and a woman. And I actually did lead the movement to abolish nuclear weapons, along with Randy Forsberg, who wrote the Freeze campaign. So, look, you can be a Joan of Arc or a John of Arc.
Mm-hmm.
Find a horse and off you go. No, really, because I've done it. If I've done it, and I'm a foreigner, you can do it. It's your country. It's your world.
Hear, hear. All right,
Thank you so much, Joseph.
All right. And that was our interview. And I think you can tell why I had trouble trimming that down. She's such a passionate advocate for peace and sanity. It's just so nice to hear these days. It's kind of rare. All right. But now we've got to move on very quickly because there's not much time left of the show. And I want to go to our patrons and sponsors. For Green Futures brought to you by the Wood County Park District. The Wood County Park District is a natural resources conservation agency. They protect natural spaces, maintain quality green spaces, provide engaging programming, and they teach people to love and respect nature. They restore wildlife habitats and they lead outdoor adventures. Wood County Parks protects natural spaces in Wood County for all to enjoy, from 8 a.m. to 30 minutes past sunset every day of the year. Several ways to get a hold of them. One is to call them at 419-353-1897, 419-353-1897. They'll be happy to talk with you. Another is to go to their website, which is wcparks.org. That's wcparks.org. And then you can also go, they have an app. You can go to any app store and download it. Just search for WC Parks. And this time I wanted to particularly mention their next big thing that's coming up, and that is Saturday, December 10th, 1 to 4 p.m. at the Carter Historic Farms. They're going to have a heritage holiday, they call it, with wagon rides, hot cider for everybody to drink, games of people back in the 20s and 30s, singing of Christmas carols, and all that incredible holiday spirit. It's going to be manifesting there on the Saturday, December 12th at the Carter Historic Farms. Okay, For Green Futures also brought to you by our patrons, and our patrons are foresightful, intelligent people who had the good sense to go to patreon.com, that's Patreon, searched for A Green Future, up popped our Patreon page, and they signed up there for a monthly contribution that matches their budget so that nobody has to suffer here, but we really appreciate the help, and that's what allows us to stay on the air. And now that we're on the air, we use that to bring you some information and stuff you might not hear otherwise. For example, Rebecca, are you ready to talk trees?
I'm ready.
All right, let's go for it.
All right, so I once again thought this would be just, simple, I'm going to define trees. Okay, well, I'll just review my high school biology and spit out what phylum they're in or whatever. No, that's not how it works. Because a tree is really pretty much a social construct. They're not.
Okay.
Actually, the fact that something is called a tree says absolutely nothing about what other plants it is related to, because a tree is not actually like a genetic fact. It's more of a job description, if I could put it that way. Like, there's not trees. A tree can very much be more closely related to other non-tree plants in its taxon and its like classification group than it is to other trees, because a tree is a response. It's a form that a lot of plants can take in order, if that's what's going to help them survive and thrive, is actually what it is. There are a lot of plants that have a tree form, a shrub form, and sometimes even an herb form, depending on what is gonna be best for them and help them flourish, basically. To extent there are definitions. Basically, there's sort of a spectrum. There's a spectrum of plant classification, sort of based on whether things are small and soft or tall and hard. Really soft, small plants are generally speaking called herbs. The hardest and tallest plants are called trees. In between, there are shrubs in the middle of the spectrum, but such definitions as exist about where one classification begins and one ends are kind of just stuff that botanists made up that sort of fairly closely coincide with what humans look at and think, oh, there's a tree. That's really the definition. A tree is something that humans call a tree. Most of them are woody perennials. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that's a little awkward, because isn't this National Tree Day?
Yeah, it is. So if something looks like a tree, then be happy about it. I don't know.
Okay, so as long as it looks like a tree, we can celebrate it. Okay.
Mostly, yeah.
Okay.
They're woody perennials that mostly have a central trunk, which is stiff, and also branches. And trees make up, despite being sort of imaginary, they make up the majority of the Earth's terrestrial biomass. They're important because of trunks and roots. Most of this is from Britannica, but I had to go backtrack and do a lot of definitions too. I had to make side trips. The trunks and roots store carbon dioxide, and they move water around, and they produce oxygen, and they contribute to soil content with decayed leaves, branches, whole trees sometimes, yada yada. Trees can be pteridophytes, which are seedless vascular plants. They can also be cycads, including ginkgo classification. Okay. Oh, tree ferns. Yeah, they can be gymnosperms, I think, including tree ferns. And also ginkgos and conifers. And also, the third one is they can be angiosperms or flowering plants. So, a lot of plants in a lot of different groups can become trees if conditions are right, basically. Those are basically the three major classifications of vascular plants, I believe. Vascular means that, tracheophytes, they have rigid and woody, they contain lignin. Wait a minute. Okay, I got things out of order. Vascular plants basically have sort of tubes that transport tissue for conducting water and minerals to the plant. And they're woody, they're rigid because they contain something called lignin. Lignin being a phenolic, polymer. Polymer means it contains very large molecules. Phenol means it's basically the same thing as carbolic acid. So, and my dog has woken up. You hush.
All right.
So, yeah.
All right. Well, I think
trees
we're
are not
kind of running out of time. Is there any big shocking fact you wanted to share with us?
Well, okay, cacti can be trees. They can have tree forms, and also banana trees are not considered trees by botanists because they have no woody trunk. And my dog is a little jerk, by the way. That's a scientific fact. They've done studies.
Well, that sounds like banana tree prejudice to me, but I don't know. All right. Thanks very much, Rebecca. Like I say, we're already just a few minutes left, and we got a whole bunch of ecological.
We are
news to
8
cover.
minutes. She was okay. Give me a break.
All right, here we go. On to ecological news. I got to zip through these stories. One, some good news. EPA has ordered the General James Gavin coal plant in Cheshire, Ohio. This is a story from the News and Sentinel on October 19th. They've ordered them to stop dumping their coal ash into unlined pits, which is great. The actual law telling them to stop doing that was the rule was created back in 2015. So this is not a shock. They're not rushing into anything here, but dumping coal ash into unlined pits means the groundwater gets contaminated with arsenic, mercury, cadmium, and a whole bunch of other really nasty stuff. So there is a big loophole in it for grid reliability. So if it threatens grid reliability, they don't have to stop. But assuming there is no threat to grid reliability, this might cause the plant to shut down as soon as January. So that's some good news. Now, but on to bad news. Okay, we got a left right here. Diablo Canyon. We've talked about Diablo Canyon before. It's California's last nuclear plant. Sits right on top of a whole bunch of fault lines. And the Biden administration has given Diablo Canyon $1 billion to keep on running. And that was pushed through by Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, who all of a sudden loves nukes, even though he got elected by people who hate nukes. Similarly, Senator Dianne Feinstein did what she could to get this $1 billion into the pockets of Pacific Gas and Electric, PG&E. And she wrote a letter explaining this past summer why she's changed her position on nuclear power. But really, it's just a list of the false talking points from the nuclear industry. Probably a PR firm wrote it for her. But the real reason can be found at opensecrets.org. Turns out Pacific Gas and Electric is, in fact, Dianne Feinstein's largest campaign contributor, contributing well over $250,000. And then one of the next bigger ones is something called General Atomics, which is an atomic energy company, and they tossed in another $120,000. But it's just another. It always shocks me how little people sell out for, if you know what I mean. She's only getting like 300, 500,000 from these nasty corporations, and then turns around in the federal government through Nuclear Joe gives them $1 billion. So that's a great investment if you're a corporation. 10:55. We're pushing through here. The Olkiluoto reactor in Finland. Olkiluoto reactor in Finland. We've been following this. Nuclear industry sent up cheers back in March when the plant turned on. Unfortunately for the people of Finland, the plant has still not been hooked up to the grid. So even though it's been busily churning out nuclear waste since March, it hasn't been providing anybody with any electricity. And now we find that won't happen at the earliest until after January, which, there's this little inconvenient thing in Finland they have. It's called winter. It gets really cold there, so they're looking at potential blackouts because they don't have this nuclear plant up and running. But it turned out that even though this thing they took more than 10 years, they took, 17 years building this thing, and it's 11 billion euros over budget. The impellers on the feed water pumps, and those are the pumps that keep the water covering the core so the plant doesn't explode and melt down, those have all cracked and are broken. And so they don't know why. Something went wrong in their 17 years of construction. And so they're saying the earliest is end of January, but I'm predicting not at all in 2023. But it's just worth noting that even their successes in the nuclear industry are failures these days. Okay, mere minutes left. Good news. Detroit Energy was refused most of a rate increase that they wanted. They asked the Public Service Commission in Michigan for a $300 million rate increase. Public Service Commission gave them $30 million, which will increase the average bill for a Michigander by about 71 cents. Basically, there was a whole bunch of public testimony against it, and people laid out look, they're just lying. They don't need this big an increase. They just want to give their shareholders more profit. And one really good thing about it was that in the same filing, Detroit Energy asked to cut the reimbursement rate to solar power owners, just like Bowling Green, Ohio, following their suit. And that was denied. The Public Service Commission said, no, you can't pay them, a tiny fraction of what their electricity is worth. You pay them what their electricity is worth, which means people will keep putting panels on their roofs in Michigan. Unfortunately, the state has a 1% cap on the demand, on the amount of solar that can be installed statewide. They're still way below that 1%, but now at least they won't be stopped from even reaching that. And just as a side note, Australia's grid did really well in the last floods. They hardly went down at all. All right, last story. The Great Salt Lake brine flies. Usually there's tens of billions of them every year. This year it's collapsed because there's not enough water in the Great Salt Lake, and it's causing all kinds of ecological havoc. Sorry to end on a down note, but thank you so much for listening. This is Joe DeMare.
And Rebecca Wood.
And we are signing off.
Give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit